Member for Corangamite. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I'll call the member for Leichhardt.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. On October the 29th, I attended a citizenship ceremony hosted by Cairns Regional Council. There were 83 people officially receiving their Australian citizenship that day. As someone who, like many others, takes their own citizenship as a given, it was an inspiring experience. From all around the world, the new migrants came, a total of 20 countries, from Argentina to the Philippines, Ireland to Laos, New Zealand and France. Individuals, couples and families stood in the front of the room with a look of pride and achievement on their faces, dressed in formal suits, colourful national dress or the more casual attire of their newly adopted country. They beamed as they received their certificates and shook hands with the Deputy Mayor for the cameras. I also visited our Australian servicemen and women on rotation in the Middle East earlier this year, Mr Deputy Speaker, and in extreme temperatures and gruelling conditions against a foe whose barbarity is to be feared. And they put their lives on the line every day for their country. They flew 8 to 12-hour sorties into enemy territory, refuelling mid-air multiple times, knowing that if they went down, that they would be in the hands of a brutal force. When I asked them, "What do you think? Do you think Australia should be here? Do you agree with what we're doing and the values that we're fighting for?" Their empathetic answer, as young men and women in the service of their country, was absolutely yes. Couldn't help but contrast those situations with the shooting of police accountant Curtis Ching by a 15-year-old as Mr Ching left work for the day to head home with his family, or the stabbing of 2 counter-terrorism officers in Melbourne by an 18-year-old whose passport had been cancelled because of the fears that he would be joining Daesh, or the holding of 18 people in the Lint Cafe Sydney as a crazed hostage taker played cat and mouse with their lives, resulting in 2 deaths, or the luring of Melbourne teenager Jake Balbardi to extremism, courting him to travel to Syria to fight with and eventually die with ISIL. Do the actions of these perpetrators, themselves Australian citizens, bear any commonality with the values held by new citizens in Cairns and the members of our Defence Force? No, they do not. And that is why we're here. We are here at the moment. The reality is that Australian social landscape is changing and the terrorism threat is rising. The number of Australians joining extremist groups overseas is increasing, and the number of known sympathisers and supporters of extremists is increasing. The number of potential terrorists is certainly rising. Our security agency is currently managing over 400 high-priority counter-terrorism investigations. The number has more than doubled since early 2014. Around 110 Australians are currently fighting or engaged with terrorism groups in Syria and Iraq. About 190 in Australia are providing support to individuals and groups in the Syria-Iraq conflicts through financing and recruitment, or are trying to travel there themselves. The bill that we're debating here today, Mr Deputy Speaker, states Parliament recognises that Australian citizenship is a common bond involving reciprocal rights and obligations, and that citizens may, through certain conduct incompatible with the shared values of the Australian community, demonstrate that they have severed that bond, repudiated their alliance to Australia. We announced our plans earlier this year to amend the Australian Citizenship Act 2007 and to provide for the loss of citizenship in the case of dual nationals engaged in terrorism-related conduct. Supporting and engaging in terrorist activities against Australia's interests is a breach of a person's commitment and allegiance to our country, a bond that should unite our citizens. These new powers in the bill are, I believe, highly necessary and appropriate to respond to the evolution of the terrorist threat. It's important to note that we already have the ability to cancel a person's citizenship if a dual citizen serves in the armed forces of a country at war with Australia. What we're doing now, Mr Deputy Speaker, is updating our laws so that they better reflect current threats to our country and our values through terrorism-related activity. The bill applies to a person who is a dual national, regardless of how the person became an Australian citizen, including a person who became Australian citizen upon birth. I'm pleased that the bill has been thoroughly scrutinised since the amendments were proposed, and the Parliamentary Joint Committee for Intelligence and Security reported back in September with 27 recommendations which have been taken into account. The list of conducts which will lead to a person losing their Australian citizenship is comprehensive, and it includes engaging in international terrorism activities using explosive or lethal devices, engaging in a terrorism act, providing or receiving training connected with preparation for, engagement in or assistance in a terrorist act, directing the activities of a terrorism organisation, recruiting for terrorism organisations, financing terrorism, financing a terrorist, and engaging in foreign incursions and recruitment. These may be carried out offshore or carried out in Australia, where a person has then fled the country before being charged. The actions must also be carried out with specific intention, and it could be to advance a political, religious or ideological cause. It could be, Mr Deputy Speaker, to support, promote or engage in a hostile activity in another country, or it could be on the instructions of a declared terrorist organisation. Since 1949, we've been able to cancel someone's citizenship if they fight on the side of a country that's at war with Australia. Now the bill extends the right to cancel somebody's citizenship if they're also a citizen of another country, are overseas and fights for or in the service of a declared terrorist organisation. Terrorist organisation becomes declared when it's directly or indirectly engaged in preparing, planning and assisting in fostering the doing of a terrorist act or advocates the doing of a terrorist act, and is opposed to Australia or Australia's interests, values, democratic beliefs, rights or liberties, and that if a person were to fight or to be in the service of such an organisation, the purpose would be acting inconsistently with their allegiance to Australia. There are safeguards, Mr Deputy Speaker, in place here, and because we are dealing with highly complex situations. People won't be deemed to be in the service of a declared terrorist organisation if their actions were not intentional, or if they are forced to do them under duress, or if they're doing them for the purpose of independent humanitarian assistance. They also can't have their Australian citizenship revoked if it would render them stateless, meeting Australia's international obligations. Following the recommendations from the PJCIS, the list of offences is limited to the most relevant terrorism-related offences with a maximum penalty of 10 years or more. It's also been extended to include offences by people who travel to foreign countries with an intention to engaging in hostile activities. It is important that we make sure that the bill is as effective as possible, given the activities of terrorists overseas and the actions that we've seen taken by Australians who have travelled overseas to fight. To be considered under this section, a person must be sentenced to at least 6 years imprisonment for treason, espionage, terrorism, international terrorist activities using explosive or lethal device, treachery, sabotage and foreign incursions and recruitment. The person ceases to be an Australian citizen at the time a determination is made by the Minister. Our law enforcement and intelligence agencies operate with professionalism, thoroughness and integrity. It's these agencies that will provide the Minister with information relating to a person's conduct or conviction. Again, there is a set process and timeframes as to how someone's cancellation of citizenship can happen. The Minister must consider a number of factors, such as the severity of the action, the degrees of threat posed to the Australian community, the person's age and their connection to the other country of citizenship, and if a decision to revoke citizenship is made, then there is, of course, capacity for a judicial review. If this is successful, a person loses their citizenship under the bill, they cannot get it back again unless the Minister revokes the notice. the loss of citizenship is overturned by a court or the declaration of a terrorist organisation is disallowed in the Parliament. In such cases, it is as if the person never lost their citizenship in the first place. For people who are found to be still in Australia when they lose their Australian citizenship, the process of actually returning them to their country of their other nationality or citizenship will be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. This is already done regularly with people who have had visas cancelled, including permanent visa holders who may have been here for a significant amount of time. The amended bill makes sure that people who are carrying out conduct because of their role in with Australian law enforcement or intelligence agencies aren't impacted. In addition, no part of the amended bill will apply to a child aged under the age of 10, and the conduct-based provisions of the bill will not apply to a child under the age of 14. The Minister must take the age in the best interest of the child into account when considering whether to revoke citizenship following a conviction. The bill will also not allow the Minister to revoke a child's citizenship following revocation of a parent's citizenship. Every 6 months, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Minister must table a report to each House of Parliament that sets out the number of notices given by the Minister, the number of notices the Minister successfully attempted to give, and for each notice given or attempted to be given under paragraph, a brief statement of matters that are the basis of the notice. This will help to ensure accountability and transparency in the process. Mr Deputy Speaker, Australia is not acting alone internationally in taking these steps to remove citizenship. In 2014, the UK passed legislation which expanded the government's power to revoke the citizenship of naturalised person. Canada has also recently passed legislation expanding the basis on which citizenship may be revoked and the process of which this may happen. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, on November the 11th we commemorated Remembrance Day and paid tribute to those who made the ultimate sacrifice for their country in all the wars and our armed conflicts. I think it was timely that we debate this legislation that will reinforce the value of our Australian citizenship. The bill provides our agencies and authorities with appropriate measures to penalise people who treat their Australian citizenship with contempt. These are people who enjoy the rights and the privileges of Australian citizenship, including freedom of speech and the ability to travel to many countries, yet who actively speak out or fight against the very system that has enabled these freedoms. It clearly doesn't make sense to allow these people to continue to remain as part of our society, and I think it's important that we send a very, very strong message to those individuals that are contemplating these sort of actions that they are certainly not welcome, that is not part of who we are in this country, and by taking these actions there will be very serious and lasting consequences. I therefore commend this bill to the House.